I don't save money on groceries by clipping a bunch of coupons or running to all the different grocery stores in my area to try to find the best deals every single week. That might work for some people, but for me, the best way that I've found to save money, and I've saved thousands doing this, is to just take inventory of everything that I have first in the pantry, refrigerator, and freezer, and then create meals from those things. And even if it's just a small bag of rice or spinach or something like that, that's something to start with. Then I'll look at the store ad and try to build from there using all of the sale items. So let me show you exactly what I do. I like to start by taking inventory of everything so I know exactly what I'll have on hand and what needs to be used right away before it goes bad. So in my freezer here, I do have a lot of leftover meat. I've got some brisket, and I also have some things like frozen beans. I also have a lot of random vegetables like whole tomatoes in my freezer, whole bell peppers. So I definitely need to lighten the load here in my freezer. And by the way, a lot of these are homegrown tomatoes, so I just have a lot of random sized tomatoes. But you can just freeze them whole if you're not gonna use them right away. So I just have a lot of things on hand here. Once I've got my inventory all written down, I like to write exactly what I'm gonna be making every single day. Whatever it is, I'll write it down so that way I know exactly what I'm gonna be making on every evening, so that way I am not sort of last minute trying to throw things together. Okay, now that I have my inventory and everything written down and a general plan for what I want to make this week, I always go to my ad next. This is super important. So Aldi is the grocery store that I have chosen based on the sale items that they have, the prices they always have that are really low. But I also have Vons and Albertsons really close to me, so sometimes I'll check both ads just to make sure there's not lost leaders that I want to go grab, because I generally don't spend more than $50 a week for my family of 4 and not more than $400 a month or so, just depending on the month if we have celebrations and things. But anyway, this particular week, they have blueberries for $1.29. They have mandarin oranges for $2.69, iceberg lettuce for 89 cents. So these are some of the things that I would put on my list. So iceberg lettuce is great for making salads or adding to sandwiches. So that's something that I might, go with. Plus 95 cents for 2 pounds of carrots. That is an excellent deal. It's usually about $2 for 2 pounds. So I would usually implement those ingredients into my meal plan. So for this particular week though, I'm filming this later, I found that cabbage was a good price and I really didn't need to get a whole lot of things. So I got cabbage and some potatoes because I believe they were doing $4 for 10 pounds of potatoes or some crazy deal like that, which is pretty frequent at my Aldi. But those are things that I always look at. And since I go to my Aldi all the time, I know the things that are frequently on sale and I can usually work those into my meal plan. But also, if I can show you the other ad here, Vons Albertsons, for instance, this week has $1.77 a pound on grapes and 99 cents for an avocado. So those are some things I might think about, but I do know now that I've shopped at my Aldi for a while, I know that my Aldi tends to have cheaper prices on those things all the time anyway. So just because it looks like it's on sale doesn't necessarily mean that it is on sale. So it's smart to kind of go to your local grocery stores and take note of which place has less expensive items based on the things that you actually buy. Not just these, random sales that look like sales, but they're not always sales. So it's good to know your prices. And they even have $2.99 a pound for chicken breasts or thighs, which is a pretty good deal too. So that's something I might take advantage of if I need a chicken, but my freezer is pretty loaded, so I don't think I need to go get anything else except for maybe some fresh produce, a few snack items for back to school. Then of course I'm gonna be picking up the potatoes and maybe a couple other ingredients to finish some things that I have in mind. So let's get started. By the way, I know some of you might be thinking the math isn't mathing, $50 a week, but no more than $400 a month. Let me just explain really quickly. So I try not to spend more than $50 a week at my weekly grocery shop because I have to kind of work into the budget. When my husband goes rogue, sometimes he does that and he wants to go pick up something to smoke on the smoker and that'll cost $30 or $40 or something crazy like that, or some last minute emergency trip where I have to pick up something if someone gets ill and we have to do an extra shopping trip. Or something like that. So I try to work things into the plan, knowing how our spending goes every single month. So I try to keep my budget relatively small on my weekly trips. And then if there's something that comes up, it's not a big deal. We'll still stay under budget. I hope that explains that. For this first clean out recipe, I'm just going to be making a basic burrito using some ground turkey that I had in the freezer. I just put it in the refrigerator for 24 hours to thaw out. And then I'm just going to saute it in a large pan with some oil and some of my homemade taco seasoning. And I had some beans in the freezer. They're just pinto beans, and I wanted to try to turn them into some refried beans. So I had another large pan, and I heated some oil, and I wanted to, fry them up and sort of mash them and make them refried beans. For whatever reason, though, this batch of refried beans turned out grainy, and I have no idea. Maybe I didn't have enough liquid, because this particular batch I did not save the bean liquid when I froze it. So I'm not sure if that's what it was. And I tried to add some water, but I'm not sure why it was so grainy. So if anybody knows why refried beans get grainy, let me know. I don't know if maybe it was that the beans were too old when I had cooked them from scratch, or what it was, and they just didn't cook evenly maybe. So I just added some seasonings though, onion powder, garlic powder. Normally it turns out beautifully, especially when I use black beans. I just mash up the black beans after I fry them in oil for a minute and add some seasonings, and they turn out great. So again, I think maybe the beans were just a little bit old or something like that. We still ate them though. Now I added a little bit of salt because we are a lower sodium household, and when I make this homemade taco seasoning, I don't usually add a lot of salt to it. So I'm adding salt to both just to add the flavor at this point, and I can control it a little bit better. And instead of lettuce, I had cabbage on hand, and I find that cabbage works just fine instead of like iceberg or romaine lettuce for a topping for tacos or burritos. So I'm just going to shred it with a knife, just cut it in half. I like to remove the very bottom of the core, and then I just slice it really thinly to shred it. And I always wash my cabbage, even though it's, essentially a closed vegetable. I still like to make sure that I give it a good wash and a spin. And I learned this new way to open an avocado by just squeezing my thumbs together on the top and then the bottom, and it opens it right up without a knife or any kind of tool. And I just thought that was cool. I wanted to show y'all that it's super fast and easy if you don't have a tool or a knife on hand, and then you can just squeeze out the pit, the seed there in the middle. And sometimes though, you're going to have to scoop off some of the extra avocado that gets stuck to the pit. Then I'm just going to squeeze the avocado out into a bowl and mash it. And this just makes it a little bit easier to serve on top of tacos or burritos. Next, I'm going to shred the cheese. I like to shred it by hand. I just feel like I get more for my money when I buy the block and just shred it myself, and it always tastes a little bit better. And of course, I'm going to heat up the tortillas on the stovetop, and then all of my toppings will get added here to the tortilla. A little bit of the beans, the meat, and then just whatever leftover veggies I have, some salsa, sometimes Greek yogurt if I have it on hand, but I didn't this time, and some hot sauce. And that was it for this dinner. Super easy and so delicious. Next, I wanted to try a new recipe for sandwich bread. Since I wasn't going to the store this week, I wanted to have a few things that were really easy to grab, and usually toast is one of my go-tos for a snack or something to pair with breakfast. So I just did my basic bread recipe. I have a no-knead recipe that's very similar to this, with just flour, yeast, salt, sugar, and water. And this particular recipe that I found added some oil. And I have really not made that much sandwich bread. And so if y'all know why we add the oil, you can let me know. And also it called for kneading the dough for about 5 minutes. It was a really sticky dough. I opted to measure the flour exactly by the gram with a kitchen scale. So I wanted to make sure it was exactly right. And so it was a very sticky dough. I don't know that I need to knead it. If anybody knows the answer to that too, I'm kind of new at making bread, but it still turned out really good. I just kneaded it, put it back in the bowl, let it rise a little bit. But the recipe said only a 40-minute rise, I think, or maybe 30 minutes. It didn't rise. It didn't double in size. But I went ahead and continued. Normally I would wait for it to double in size. I just put it in the loaf pan, and it said to top it with some oil. And then I thought this really neat trick was so cool to put a baking sheet upside down on it to keep the steam in and everything. And it turned out really good and so delicious. But I'd love to experiment and see if I really need to knead the dough or not. That's one reason why I like my no-knead bread recipe, because I don't have to knead it. And I love quick breads. I just need to find a really easy sandwich bread that doesn't require a whole lot of fuss. I don't want to spend a ton of time making bread. So if I can find an easy shortcut, I would love to have it. So if you have that shortcut, leave it in the comments for me, because I love homemade bread. This next recipe is a honey soy salmon, and I don't usually measure the ingredients for the marinade. I usually just kind of wing it. I add some soy sauce, some honey, garlic powder, give it a mix, and then my daughter and I tasted it, and we decided it needed a little bit more honey and some sesame sesame oil was the perfect addition, just a little tiny bit, because a little goes a long way. After that, we mixed it together, tasted it, and it was perfect. Now, if it's just for adults, I do recommend adding some red pepper flakes too. It really adds a ton of flavor. We're just going to add all of that to a bag with the salmon and the marinade together and give it just kind of a mix and make sure it's all coated. Then I'll just take all the air out, seal it, and put it in the refrigerator for a few hours. That way it's really easy to cook when it comes time to make dinner. Salmon is one of the most perfect pairings with cabbage in my opinion. So with the rest of the cabbage, I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick little sauce with some oil, salt, garlic powder, and pepper. It's really, really basic. I'm just going to mix that together, and then I'm going to slice the cabbage into cabbage steaks. If you've never cooked cabbage before, or you're just not too sure about cabbage, definitely give this recipe a try. I think it's really going to make up your mind, and honestly, I think cabbage is going to win you over at this point. It's just so easy and so delicious. Just add those cabbage steaks to the baking sheet, and I'm also going to just go ahead and put the rest of the shredded cabbage on the baking sheets as well, because we will be able to eat more of it that way. If I cook it down, it'll be great for leftovers, and it'll be great to just heat and pair with a bunch of things. So I'm just going to put that oil mixture on top, and with the shredded cabbage, I decided just to pour the oil on top and season it all with salt, garlic powder, and pepper, because it was just a lot easier than trying to distribute. And I'm just going to bake that for about 25 to 30 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And once the cabbage steaks have been in there for about 20 minutes or so, I am going to add in my salmon, and that's only going to take about 15 minutes to cook. I'm just putting it in a casserole dish and putting it in the oven at the same temperature, 400 degrees. And while the salmon is finishing, I'll go ahead and start plating everything after the cabbage is cooked. And I randomly just put some cheese and some of that homemade bread on my kids' plates. And for me and my husband, we share the avocado and some rice as well. And then we had a ton of fruit on the side from breakfast, so we're going to serve that on the side as well. And the kids do like this cabbage, so I do make sure I put some on their plates. I have one pickier eater and one that likes more things, so it really just depends, but I do recommend having your kids try this cooked cabbage. It is so, so good. And that's it for this dinner. Next, I'm really going to dig deep here and try to use as many random ingredients that I have on hand that I just have a little bit left of. So I've got some of this Parmesan Reggiano in the refrigerator. I'm going to go ahead and grate up the rest of this, and I'm going to save the rind though for later. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that, but I am going to go ahead and grate all of that cheese and use all of my tomatoes from the garden. I'm just going to go ahead and give those a rough chop because I'm going to be making a homemade sauce. And I'm also going to be using some zucchini I got from the garden, just a lot of random veggies that popped up that either I had in my refrigerator or that I had in my garden. I'm just going to go ahead and use for this meal and just kind of wing it. So I'm slicing all of my zucchini into smaller pieces, half moons or circles, just making sure they're all about the same size, and all of those rough chopped tomatoes I'll have on the side. Plus, my garden gave me a little bit of parsley, some carrots, and a bulb of garlic. So I went ahead and added some oil in a pot and added my minced garlic and just heated that until it was fragrant, about 30 seconds or so. And then I added all of those tomatoes, and I'm just going to get that simmering. And in the meantime, to my cheese, I'm just adding paprika, some pepper, and the fresh parsley, and just going to give that a mix and set that aside. Once the tomatoes have reduced and started releasing all of the juices, I'm going to grate in that carrot to balance the acidity, and then just add some Italian seasonings. You can add oregano, basil, parsley, Italian seasoning, whatever you want to finish the sauce. And in the meantime, I'm going to start on my tilapia. That's what I'm pairing with my spaghetti with homemade sauce. Is I'm just going to get this tilapia coated on both sides with some oil, and I'm going to top the tilapia with the cheese mixture. I did not have enough cheese to coat it on both sides, so instead of trying to dredge it, I just added the entire cheese mixture on top of the tilapia to make sure it got nice and crispy. Then I seasoned with salt, and by the way, this tilapia came out of the freezer. I had it in there for a couple of weeks from Aldi, and I just thawed it out and went ahead and cooked it. It didn't take very long at all to thaw either. And in the meantime, while that tilapia is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and put my spaghetti in the pot of boiling water. I did add a little bit of salt to the water before boiling the spaghetti, and then to the sauce I added the cheese rind. The rind from the Parmesan Reggiano is going to thicken up the sauce and add some flavor. Then after about 10 minutes, I'm removing the rind, and I'm also cooking the zucchini in some oil in another pan, just sauteing that up with some salt and pepper real basic. And I'm going to save some of the pasta water to add to my sauce because, again, that's going to add a little bit more of the sauciness and bring it together and thicken up the sauce a little bit too from the starch from the pasta. So now the tilapia is all cooked and the zucchini is nice and browned. I can just plate everything up. Super delicious, really easy, and just used a lot of random things I had on hand. At the store this week, I focused on some high protein snacks, some beef jerky, some nuts, and then added some produce and some other fresh ingredients and some staples. So although I didn't do a full grocery shop, I did have to pick up quite a few things actually for starting school. This next recipe is one of my most popular recipes that most people come back and tell me how much they loved, but I'm going to go ahead and modify it a bit and test out a few things today. So I softened the cream cheese and added my shredded pepper jack cheese and salsa like normal and gave that a good mix along with some seasonings. So I've got a lot of seasonings in this one: garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, cumin, and I usually like to add some lime juice too, but I did not have any on hand. I just gave that a good mix and I wanted to test this out without meat because usually I add chicken. So just heated up those tortillas in the microwave for about 30 seconds until they were nice and soft. Then I started spooning in my mixture and just rolling that up and putting it on a baking sheet. Now I did have some leftover brisket in the freezer and I wanted to try this recipe with different kinds of meats as well. So I went ahead and chopped up that brisket finely and sauteed it on the side, and then I added it to the rest of the mixture and went ahead and continued rolling those taquitos. And I love this recipe because it's so easy to modify with whatever you have on hand or whatever you like. So if you don't want spicy, you can do Monterey Jack instead. If you don't have lime, you can use lemon or omit it altogether. You can add any seasonings that you love, and it's a great freezer meal, and it just bakes up in about 15 to 20 minutes depending on if they're frozen. The cheese did kind of ooze out a little bit, so I wanted to kind of play with the recipe and see if I can get it just right, and the brisket ones turned out great too. Next, I'm making some baked potatoes, and I'm going to make some homemade chili. I picked up these potatoes this week because they really completed a lot of the meals, and I was really craving potatoes this week. The way to make perfect restaurant quality potatoes is to poke some holes in them after you've washed them, then coat them with a little bit of oil. I like avocado oil, then put some kosher salt, and then just bake them for about 1 hour in the oven, and they turn out great every single time. I had some frozen whole tomatoes and bell peppers. I'm just going to give those a rinse, put them on the cutting board so they can thaw out enough for me to chop them. And then I just had a lot of random other veggies on hand. So I sliced an onion and diced it up and then started chopping roughly those tomatoes because that's going to be the base for the chili. But really, you can just use whatever you have on hand for this. I did have a red bell pepper, so that's what I'm using, and I just added that in with the tomatoes. Now I'm just going to heat some oil in a pan, then add a little bit of chili flakes to add some spice, and that will add the spice at the back end too instead of a forward spice, so I love that little secret. Then I added some onions and some seasonings and sauteed until fragrant. Then I added my beans that were from the freezer and I thawed them out, and my tomatoes, bell peppers, and some tomato paste from the freezer, and a lot of seasonings, chili powder especially, a ton of chili powder, a little bit of salt, some pepper, paprika, marjoram, cumin. I add pretty much the entire spice drawer to this chili. That's just kind of what I like to do with chili, add all the seasonings, onion powder, garlic powder, you name it, I'm adding it. Then I'm just going to bring that to a simmer, cover it, and let it cook away and get really a nice depth of flavor. By the way, I baked these potatoes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, in case you're wondering what temp, and they just come out so good every single time. Then I'm just going to slice them and kind of squish them so they open up, and then I'm just going to divvy them up between us so that way there's enough for everybody. And look at that chili. It turned out so good. I love making just random ingredient chili. It usually turns out amazing. I just added that to the top of the potatoes, added some shredded pepper jack cheese, some fresh onions, and Greek yogurt is my favorite instead of sour cream. It tastes almost exactly the same. It's a wonderful substitute. If you haven't tried it, definitely give it a try. Plus some hot sauce, of course. Now this next recipe, I'm making my favorite loaded baked potato soup. I don't buy bacon very often, but when I do, I try to use some for baked potato soup. So first, I'm just going to peel the potatoes and then roughly chop them and set them aside and just slice the bacon the best way you can. I don't know what the secret is, but using these shears seem to work pretty good. And then I'm just going to add that to a cold pot, turn on the heat with the bacon in there, and just get it nice and crispy. Normally, I just get it nice and crispy, remove it, and I don't remove so much of the grease, but there was way too much grease this time, so I removed most of it. But again, a lot of times I leave the grease in there, but this time it was just too much. Then I added some butter, Butter's adding a lot of the flavor, but you can definitely substitute with anything that you like. And you can skip the bacon altogether for this recipe, by the way. It is not necessary. The butter adds a ton of flavor. Then I'll add the onions and saute until those are nice and soft and translucent, and then add some garlic powder. A lot of times I use minced garlic, but I didn't have any on hand. Then I'll add flour to make a roux. And the secret to roux is just making sure you cook out the flour flavor, and that takes a few minutes. So just make sure it's nice and golden brown before you start adding the liquid. Now I'm adding some water mixed with bouillon, but you can definitely use whatever you like. Vegetable stock, chicken stock, beef stock, anything really will do for this, or just water if that's all you have on hand. You can even add about a tablespoon of soy sauce to give you that umami flavor if you don't have any stock on hand. And we're just going to carefully add a little bit at a time so we don't get lumps, and then add our potatoes and bring that to a simmer. And I'm going to add my milk as well. You can use heavy cream, but I never have heavy cream on hand, so it always just ends up being milk for my recipes. And then I'm just going to season that with some salt and pepper and a little bit of chili powder. You can add anything you want here, though. You can add garlic powder, onion powder. Just continue to cook that on a very low boil until the potatoes are cooked through. It doesn't take long at all, maybe 12 to 15 minutes. Then start mashing if you'd like to have a creamier soup. You can use a hand blender if you like instead, but if you use a regular blender with a lid, be really careful because it could splatter because of the heat. Then I'm adding in a little bit of Greek yogurt, but you can add sour cream or cream cheese, and that's it. I like a few chunks in mine, but if you like it smoother, just blend it up. Then serve it up with some cheese, either some Greek yogurt, sour cream, and more bacon. For this next meal idea, I'm just using another head of cabbage we have on hand and some zucchini from the garden. And I'm just making the exact same recipe that I showed you before. I'm just showing you another way here that you can slice the cabbage, and again, adding that to a baking sheet. And then I'm just going to slice the zucchini as well and add that to the same baking sheet. The zucchini will end up being a little bit more soft, so if you don't like it to be soft, maybe put the zucchini on a separate tray and cook it separately for a little bit less time. I usually like my zucchini to have a bite, so for me it turned out a little bit too soft, but that's up to you. And I'm making that same mixture with the avocado oil. You can use olive oil, any neutral oil, anything that you have on hand really, or even some spray if that's all you have. And then garlic powder, salt, and pepper. And again, just mixing that up and adding that on top of the cabbage, turning it over, and then adding more of that oil on the other side and just giving it a bake. Once that cabbage is nice and caramelized, after about 25 to 30 minutes, we're just going to take it out and serve it up with the zucchini. This is a nice, easy lunch idea, just as a quick sort of hot salad, I guess you could call it. And next, I'm going to be making a really easy lunch straight from the pantry using a can of chicken that I've drained, adding a little bit of mayo and some garlic powder. This is my mom's recipe for chicken salad, and my daughter just absolutely loves it, just like this. Then adding some crackers on the side, some nuts, and then some grapes. And yes, I do still cut them for my kids, just out of an extra abundance of caution. And then adding some apples as well on the side. And this is going to be a giant lunch that we're probably going to have leftovers from. Now next, I'm making something new that I wanted to try for a long time now, and I'm finally getting around to it. I'm just going to heat some butter in a large pan and add my finely diced red onions. If I had shallots, I'd do that. Then I'm adding some garlic powder, salt, and pepper, and just sauteing until everything is nice and soft and translucent and fragrant, just about 2 or 3 minutes. Then I'm adding some gochujang. I have never tried this before. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I saw somebody, of course, on the internet making a gochujang pasta. So that's what I'm going to do. It's kind of like a spicy tomato paste. At least that's what it reminds me of. I think it might be fermented too, but I could be wrong. If you know any other ways to use this, let me know too. But I did just saute that until it got a little bit golden, and then added some milk. And I think if you had heavy cream, that would work too. Just use whatever you have on hand here. I'm just experimenting. You can add a ton of seasonings, and then I cooked the pasta on the side and saved some of the pasta water too, because again, the pasta water really helps it come together at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and scoop out my pasta with a strainer ladle. I'm not even sure if that's what that's called, but I'm just going to scoop that into the sauce, give it a stir. Now, I did not cook the pasta all the way through because the particular recipe I was following said to, add it and cook it in the sauce, and I just couldn't get it quite right. I didn't cook the pasta all the way through in the sauce. So next time I'll cook the pasta all the way through and then add it to the sauce, but it was delicious. So for this next dinner idea, again, I am making the perfect baked potatoes, just like I showed you before, and I have this random can of baked beans in the pantry that we need to use. So I went ahead and grabbed that, and I had some random things from the garden: a tomato, a jalapeno, a blueberry, and a strawberry. So I'm just going to work with it and use all of these things that we have on hand. And I had some brisket in the freezer still, so I went ahead and added that to a pan and just sauteed that up and cooked up the beans on the side. Once the potatoes were nice and cooked through, I started plating everything up. I added some apples, and I like to add a cheese for my kids because sometimes they don't always love the particular protein that I serve. So if I added cheese on the side, then usually they'll get some sort of protein source. Then I added some brisket to my husband's, and then added some beans and brisket to my kids' plates too, and then added some jalapenos, tomatoes, onions, and all of that. It was so delicious and so easy. I hope you enjoyed that video and at least got a few ideas for things to make in your home. And of course, if you have any suggestions for random recipes that you love to use with random stuff that you have on hand, please leave them down below in the comments. I always love to get more ideas and more inspiration. A lot of times you all give me most of my inspiration, to be honest with you. And YouTube thinks that you'd like to watch another video, go ahead and click on that, enjoy it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.